always healing, balance, and unity. But in order to do that work, we have to see what divides us. It's the internal personal work. So that's what I'm grateful to be here. And I work in many different communities because that's just part of my work.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I'm Angela Parker. I'm Mandan and Hidatsa from the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation in North Dakota. I'm also Cree on my dad's side from Rocky Boy, Montana. And I'm currently an assistant professor of history at the University of Denver.
I'm Anthony DePinto. I work at the National Academy of Science here to work with you all today, and I really appreciate you all coming out here and offering your knowledge. Thank you.
Yeah. So today we'll get started with our first question. Are these color coded? Should they be, or do we just go in?
We just have a particular. We have our own.
The number 3.
Yes.
All right.
That'll be our
Perfect.
group.
All right. Great. Sorry. We just want to make sure that you're not answering the same question when you go to the next room. And so, so one of the first questions that we want to talk about, and that we'll have time together with today, is what are the barriers to strengthening your community's ability to respond to stressors? And just as a quick reminder, stressors, I think, gets defined and talked about in a lot of different ways. So that's pretty open to your interpretation. But as another quick reminder, stressors for us as a committee thinking about cumulative impacts assessments, stressors are pretty broadly defined. So that could be a very toxicology based approach, air pollution or toxins in the soil, but it's also encompassing of everything from socioeconomic stressors and beyond. So it really runs the gamut. Yeah, exactly. So with that, maybe you've got an answer for us. But what are the barriers to strengthening? Yeah. So what are the barriers to strengthening your community's ability to respond to stressors?
I feel like I'm in a lot of different communities. So I'm kind of like, attached to my reservation community. And those barriers are very different from like my urban community. And my experience as like a person with educational privilege, right, means that I also have like less barriers, right, than other folks like in either of those areas. In rural areas, it's access. It's that you have to drive, like 90 minutes to access healthcare. It's the fact that rural America, just in general, there's not enough providers that actually want to like work in these spaces. So like mental health care access is really hard. And I don't think like the sort of telehealth medicine aspect of mental health is like as developed as it could be. I think the other obstacle is drug use. I'm from a tribe that has recently become very wealthy because of oil development on our reservation. And like cartels basically focused on our tribe to come and distribute like really hard street drugs like opioids, fentanyl, that kind of stuff. And so there's just a lot of folks, specifically in my generation, that are using. And so there's like this entire generation of folks that are just not present to be able to like continue cultural knowledge. I think like in an urban area, I think one of the things is like we're real spread out. And so like the work that Sid is doing, I think is really, really important because it provides like these community spaces to come together that aren't like deeply political. Because like sometimes, like urban Indian communities can be like super political. And one of the sort of like big important things to like having healthy mental health is to have that community space. And so I think, just like funding and being able to support the type of work that Sid is doing, when funding goes down, when grants are less available, as they will be under the Trump administration, that's gonna impact like our urban community a lot. As an individual, I think the medical establishment is really judgmental. Like I have diabetes and to try to get and see like an endocrinologist. And like I come from a tribe, we have the second highest rate of diabetes, a second only to the Pima. If that gives you a sense of how bad it is. And you know, as an academic, I like did my research, right? And you know, did like a literature search, like all that kind of stuff. And back in the 80s, it was something like 46% of women over 40 were diagnosed with diabetes. And now it's even more. And like the diabetes rates are hitting earlier and earlier, like they're getting worse and worse. So when I was diagnosed, you know, I just don't think like the Western medical establishment really gives a shit about people who don't fit their protocols. Like they look at you and they're like, oh, we're gonna have this, you know, trajectory of your care. But it's not based on my situation. It's based on like some random like group of white people. And so the protocol for like the random white people is okay, you get metformin and maybe you see a doctor, maybe you don't. And I was like, no, like I've seen my aunties and my grandmas literally like get their feet cut off or have to travel to dialysis, you know, 3 hours, you know, each way. I've seen that, right? I've seen my grandma like inject herself with insulin when I was a little kid. Like, I don't want to follow this general protocol. I want to be aggressive. Like, I want to aggressively try to protect my health. And the doctors that I've talked to, even endocrinologists, are just like super judgy. And they're like, well, since you were diagnosed so early, you know, I think it's just going to be inevitable that you face like these certain things. And I'm like, wow, you know, I'm 48 and it is kind of early, but like I legit know people who are diagnosed with type 2 diabetes when they're like 20. Like, how can you tell me this is my trajectory? And it's like very alienating and off-putting because we have this Western medical system that's like they don't care about you. They just want to enforce their cost-saving protocols. Okay, that's the end of my rant.
Yes, I have more questions for you. No.
It's all great feedback. And just want to kind of maybe reiterate some of that just to make sure I'm capturing this correctly. But you talked about some of the differences between the rural barriers to community's ability to respond and be, you know, what's their ability to respond to these stressors. But then there's also unique urban setting differences. And then you also mentioned every different tribe has their own set of contexts. You pointed out your own tribe's recent developments and things like that. But then how maybe in some tribes or in urban settings, maybe substance use is a major driving stressor or barrier for folks to be able to respond to those stressors. I heard about funding during kind of different and possibly difficult administrations. But then I also heard you talk about at an individual level, there are often things that keep us as individuals being able to respond to that. And then kind of zooming back out to kind of a very broad, just kind of westernized approach as a system that is also creating barriers.
Yeah, it like erases the textures and realities of Native life because we are all different. We're all from different communities. We have different historical trajectories, but like Western medicine doesn't care about that. They don't want to see that. They don't want to take that into account. They're just like, okay, let's follow this trajectory of care that was established by people who look nothing like you and who aren't facing the same historical stressors.
Well, one thing I heard her say was that back in the 40s or early 50s, whatever, she said that there was a lesser amount of women who contracted diabetes. But I believe that when the money was introduced to your tribe through the oil revenue, that the numbers of women with diabetes grew So I believe there's something there that changed that with the way of life. Having this money created a worse health epidemic than it was prior to having that money. So that's something really unique there, just the way you stated that part.
Well, the biggest change was in like the 40s and 50s, but it was because of this, and I wrote a book about this. But they flooded out the bottomlands of my reservation, and that just changed our way of life. And like literally people talk about it, it changed it from daylight to dark. Like that's like a quote. And so we went from like a ranching and like farming and like gardening economy to no economy, right? And so like my mom was sent away to boarding school because there was no schools, there was no like transportation, there wasn't like infrastructure like to transport kids. And the rates of alcoholism just like skyrocketed. And before that dam, we didn't have any diabetes. We didn't have heart disease. We didn't have any of these metabolic conditions. And, you know, between 1950 when that dam was instituted and 1980s when that study was done, 46% of women over the age of 40 have diabetes. And it's even more now. So, yeah.
So changing that environment
Yeah.
really caused a big health epidemic with diabetes. It was already present because it's just the way it is with our people are like, as one of the stressors is a nutritional value of the food that we have access to is like non-existent anymore. Like we have to really make some big efforts. Like every year, I receive a buffalo from the city of Denver, and we do a buffalo harvest and a butchering, and we distribute all the meat to the local community, because that's like you try to buy some buffalo meat and it's quite expensive. Yeah, and that's like one of the mainstays of all our people, you know, especially my people, the Lakota. So it's really hard for some of us to get back into those, I guess, ancestral norms that are kind of built in our DNA. So once we get pulled out of that, it then becomes a problem health-wise, and then we start getting to the other physical aspects that start to change, and our mentality starts to change. And, you know, it just kind of engulfs us in a whole nother world. And even if money's involved, we think it's going to help, it doesn't. Sometimes it just doesn't, because it's
Sometimes it makes things worse.
yeah, and in this case, it sounded like it made things worse with the diabetes, because he probably was able to just purchase any food that was brought into the area. And I know you heard where she's talking about, that area is reliant on the trucking system to like bring in truckloads of goods. And a lot of times it's name brands that are quite expensive as opposed to the generic brands. And there's a lot of people who just stick to these little grocery stores, little, you know, that they have on these reservations that are like inadequate. They don't stock their shelves. They're like, if storm comes, oh, no toilet paper. You think that's bad? It's like no food, you know?
Yeah. No, this is definitely really good points to pull out. I hope it's not calling you out too much, but I'd love to hear from you before we run out of time. Are there, just again to reiterate the question, what are the barriers to strengthening your community's ability to respond to stressors?
So I will speak from my own experience with my family. And we were raised with the erasure of our culture. We were raised in fear. We were raised in violence. We were raised in trauma. We were raised in sexual and rape. And all of that came down to 7 generations. Well, actually, my dad is the 5th. I'm 6 children of the 7. 5th generations. And I'm also a recovering addict from methamphetamines, anorexic, bulimia, drugs, and alcohol, like anything that you could think of, so I wouldn't have to deal with my feelings or my emotions. And when I asked, was my faith also too, I walked away from my faith because I felt like something betrayed me. And I didn't feel like, why am I being punished? Why am I suffering so much? Why am I in so much pain? And I could see that this was something that was hereditary in my family. So when I was going to take my life, something really profound happened. And it said it would show me how to live. I said, teach me how to not walk in this path and walk in this door, and teach me how to live in happiness, joy, and bliss. Do I have a right to be happy in my life? You teach me how to make peace with all the pain and suffering that I have inherited from my family and from my, our tradition and our ancestors. Teach me how to make inner peace with that. And I will do what it is that you're asking me to do. And it was the first time that I established trust from within. I did not know that I had the ability to ask my own inner guidance in this body that is the temple of the Ahau or Tungashala or Creator. But this is a vessel that communicates this. So I started to do what it asked me to do, because as long as I didn't walk in that door, which was the pain and suffering, this door was in the all possibilities, the new perspective, opening up my lens to what are all the possibilities. It started to give me a different life. I had a really bad stutter from methamphetamines, and I asked for the ancestors to guide me and teach me how to speak clearly, because I can go off in the spiritual realm and just, be with the cosmos, be with the I can be with the galactic relatives. I have studied with many different teachers, and I am grateful to sit with many different traditions to see that it is the inner guidance, it is the inner being. There is an authority here inside of us that is always keeping record of what we're doing. And that is what I answer to, because when I take my last breath, that is who I will be speaking to. I know that the ancestors come and bless us in the invisible forces, and I am grateful because I don't know how I'm going to show up in spaces, and I like to do things intuitively because that's the authentic self. But I have to speak from my truth that when I got sober, because I also abandoned my own children because it was something that I inherited, but it's something that I also did because I just didn't know how to raise my own children. That when I got sober, I asked my children to forgive me. And then again, the ancestor said, then you need to forgive your father. I said, I don't know how to do this. We'll teach you, we'll show you how to do this in meditations and all the spiritual teachings that you'll be walking in. Because if you want your children to forgive you, then you have to forgive your father, because that's just how it works. Energy mirror is the reflection of who we are. So I had to be that person in my family to say, okay, I have to sit with this. I have to sit with it and recognize that when I was in pain and suffering, how hard it made my body feel, how hard my perspective was on when I was around people, and to not blame people anymore, to take full accountability and responsibility for my life. Because when I take full accountability and responsibility for my life, it changes how I move in the world. Because then I get to really enjoy, because I know that when I'm hard, my body hardens. It can make my body sick. And I don't want to make my body sick, especially since it's 100% the sacred water and I have the fire inside me. I want the encoding when I'm speaking to the water that I may not know how to do this, but I ask that you show me how to move through this. Show me how to face this. Show me how to face this part of myself. And that's why I work in the unity and the collective of all of us, because what unites us is our hearts. What unites us is our brains. We may have different ways of thinking, but that's the Creator expressing itself through many different ways. I want to be in a space where I'm talking about healing, and I talk about medicine with my family, but it always unites with the healing and balance, because I deserve, and everybody deserves, to not suffer in pain. We were not meant to suffer in our pain. We hurt ourselves. Yes, I'm hurt, but not constantly, oh, I'm in pain. Oh, I'm in pain. Oh, and the body hears this and it's like, oh, you're in pain. Oh, well, then we're going to bring more pain, because it's intelligent. It has its own intelligence to heal. It healed me from methamphetamines. It healed me from drugs and alcohol. It healed me. But I had to hold space with it and not judge. I had to be open in a space of, I don't know. And that's one of the hardest things for us, is because we were raised that we have to know in the analytical world, right? We have to know A, B, C, D, E, because that's what makes us feel safe. When we create, do we have to feel safe? When we create, are we in the, I need to know step from step to step? Because then for the perfection of that is that we're hard on ourselves. We don't need that. A child, only knows when it hurts itself once. But if we go, oh, you're hurt there, it remembers that it was hurt again. So we're like children. The outside environment of that is I have to know when I'm in an environment that's not sustaining, or if it's an environment that's not feeding me and helping me thrive in my life. Everybody has a right to live in their own way. I'm not going to tell anyone that they shouldn't live a certain way. I have to watch my boundaries because I'm just Beverly. I'm really like nobody, but I'm responsible for when I go to bed to check in with myself to see, did I show up the best way that I can? Because that's where my confidence comes from, is having that conversation with that which gives me life. And that's why I do the work that I do, is because how well do we check in with ourselves? We blame a lot of things outside of us and it gives our power away. I'm about, let's empower the people back. Step into your power. Remember, the earth is what gives us everything. So that's what I check in always. That is my authority, is the earth and the cosmos. So like.
No, this is so beautiful. Thanks for sharing. That's a very personal and vulnerable story to share with the group. Like all three of you, sharing personal, stories like that. So I just want to thank you. If you have further reflections or thoughts, please feel free to jot them down and hand them to me, Anthony, anybody else from the staff around this. Unfortunately, our time is coming to a close. Anthony's going to help you get to the next group so that way you can mingle and get to know other folks and answer the next question. And then do we start in like?
You can start, I mean, the next group is coming in.
Oh, they're already here.
You can start when you're ready.
All right, great.
And I'll come back in.
Okay, perfect. Hey, thanks so much, Sid. Appreciate you.
You'll know my phone.
Hey, John Ben. Hey, John Ben. Hey, John Ben. Can I ask a quick question? Hey, come on in. Am I doing the same question? Okay. And that's the right one, right? Is it this one? Because I see that it has someone else's name, but I just wanted to confirm.
So which university do you work in New Zealand?
Yeah.
You got your DU colors on.
Yeah.
I graduated from CC, so you know.
All right.
We have to be rivals, but only on the hockey ring.
I did the other one. I was born very similar name.
Local.
I thought that was for that.
So, yeah, you know, me and Mile High City, get along really well.
There's like two groups.
So, watch it grow, watch it change a lot.
Fine. You want to report out?
Rick Waters, play basketball. Well, actually, he was a point guard, so.
Okay, sorry, I must have just moved it.
We won a lot.
But yeah, this is the question.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
That's the same one we have.
Give you that one.
It's
You're gonna do
nice.
that now, and then before we go for lunch.
Angela
And
Parker,
then in the afternoon.
she's also.
We'll be back in
so
here and we'll do the
she's
question.
perfect.
and answer.
Thanks.
She's
Appreciate it. All right.
It is, you know, in case we have to duke it out, yeah.
All right. Hey, well, don't mean to interrupt and cut the fun too short here. I know that we've got limited time, so we'll just go around and do some brief introductions. I know two of you already, but I don't know everybody and maybe not the rest of the group. So, and then also we have some folks that will be joining us on Zoom, the other committee member that couldn't be here with us in person. So, just quickly, I'm Jared. You guys have already heard from me. I work here. I'm an enrolled member of the Malaquette Community Committee from Southeast Alaska. Get to work with Devine, Guy Frack, a board member. So excited to be here in this space with you all and to learn from you, taking a copious amount of notes already. So I'll just go ahead and turn it over to DJ.
Sure, DJ Burt Bear, University of Denver Astrophysics. I'm an enrolled member of the MHA Nation. My mother's Navajo though, so we had to pick. Yeah, I decided to go with those Northerners. I better fry for them.
Oh, the fighting words. All right, getting started, eh? Great, I appreciate it.
Spencer Green, Colorado Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing. I'm the county and tribal liaison.
Perfect. Thank you for being with us. And Jolene, just for our guests on
yeah.
Zoom.
Jolene Holgate, I am the Executive Director at the Denver Indian Family Resource Center. I am domestic from the Navajo Nation and happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Did you want to do a brief introduction of yourself, Anthony?
Certainly, yeah. I'm Anthony DePinto. I work with the National Academy of Science. Thankfully, Jared has opened this space for all of us. And I really appreciate you all being here. Thank you.
All right. Well, I don't know what question you guys got in the last round, but for this session, for the next couple of minutes, we're going to be talking about what are the barriers to strengthening your community's ability to respond to stressors. And as we're ready to go. I love it. You should like take notes. But just a quick reminder, stressors from our perspective as the committee, we're charged with better understanding cumulative. I can't talk today. Cumulative impact assessments. So that's more reaching than just like a toxicology report or air pollution report. Stressors can be anything that is socioeconomic, behavioral, and also including those other stressors that I just mentioned. So it's quite a wide range, but so now just kind of kick it back to the group. What are the barriers to strengthening your community's ability to respond to those stressors? And it doesn't have to be one by one, we can have a dialogue, but if anybody wants to jump in, feel free.
I'll jump in, but just carrying it over from last time. National security.
Okay.
Yeah, we actually have the government overlooking numerous regulations that are put in place to protect the average American citizen from environmental danger. Up on the MHA, we sit on top of the Bakken, second largest oil reserves in North America. And developing domestic oil production comes at an extremely large price. We've had numerous administrations, Democrat, Republican, overlook any sort of safety barriers. So we've turned our reservation into a Superfund site in order to satisfy America's need for petroleum products. That whether it was the Obama administration, the Biden administration, or Republican, there was no enforcement whatsoever of the rules put in place only because of national security. So that certainly makes it difficult when you ask the question, who guards the guards?
Yeah.
And we don't have that. So that certainly is a very difficult barrier in terms of addressing the stressors that are already upon our community, rampant poverty, drug use, and what have you.
Oh, it's really great perspective and thought to have. Also, you have to tell your mom that we said hi. Should have gotten her here. She would have had a lot to add to the conversation.
She definitely has a lot to say.
That's just great. But yeah, no, I appreciate that perspective on kind of the national security. I just quoted this. Who guards the guards? I think that's a really important perspective. But any other thoughts on what are the barriers for folks to be able to respond to those stressors?
I'm thinking about something that usually we're talking about in the last session and that I've heard. I primarily work with our Ute Mountain and Southern Ute tribes. And what I've seen is that there's an issue in flexibility of federal funding. So stressors require, especially if they're unexpected or unanticipated, require flexibility, cultural awareness, regional awareness. And if the federal funds or grants are written in such a way that flexibility is not available, usually the funding doesn't get used and the problem doesn't get solved. And so there is a disconnect between the intention of the funding and then being able to actually implement change on the ground.
Spencer, is there any accountability? Can you ever get a head on a plate up there? So that would definitely be a barrier to addressing the stressors, the lack of accountability.
Yeah, well, and I feel like the accountability is unfortunately the burden is on the tribes or the recipient of the funding. So you have to file these reports, you have to have things in a particular way, which I totally understand from an auditing and accountability standpoint. And that doesn't solve the problem of we need increased responsibility and responsiveness to substance use problems in this particular area. We have a behavioral health access crisis, but we can't free up the funding to hire people in this particular way, even though that's what the tribal council thinks is the best option. So that's sort of the principle, the accountability feels more like a satisfying the makers of the grants or the holders of the funding versus the accountability being to the people that we're supposed to serve.
That's a really good point. Can I just follow up just a little bit more on that? So what are the avenues of accountability back to the funders? Are there any? And back to the funders, I don't mean just like in terms of reporting back to funders, but I mean like what levels of accountability can or should be enforced among the funders to allow that flexibility. Does that make sense?
I think so. I'll see if I can think.
Yeah. Please.
Something that I don't want the conversation to stall on.
No, you're good. That's fine. Yeah, Jolene, do you have any thoughts of like what are some of the barriers that are for the community's ability to respond to these stressors?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with current and historical policy.
Okay.
Right? Like the for us specifically, we were definitely affected by the unconstitutional clause of federal funding because we get 30% of our direct services come from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And of course, I think for us specifically as like a direct service provider where we get a lot of face time with low income and marginalized communities. I think what I don't see, at least in the state of Colorado, in terms of supporting urban Native people is related to what Spencer said about accountability is these policies that were put in place, like Indian relocation or ICWA, right? The 60s scope. There's still a lot of residual trauma, a lot of residual outcomes that have come from that we're experiencing today. And I really think the state and I think the city also needs to be accountable. Like how are they creating healing and repair for those who were displaced? And I think that puts a lot of stress on direct service organizations that are trying to respond as best they can in a culturally responsive way. And you have folks who are coming from reservations that are, for whatever reason, they have to come to the city. I know for a fact, like on Navajo Nation, some folks have access to housing and some folks, like my parents, you have to get a land lease and you have to get your own contractor and you have to build your own home. And not a lot of people can do that with, the median salary on Navajo Nation is like $40,000. Or it's even less than that, I think. And contractors don't want to build homes out there because you have no collateral. You don't own the land. You don't have anything that allows them to guarantee building their home. So you have like uncles and folks who are doing their best to build their homes. I know all my uncles built my parents' home. Thankfully, they're all in the construction trade. And that's what it looks like out there. And I think in the city, we've talked a little bit about it in the last group, but like housing insecurity, economic insecurity are definitely stressors that with the inflation rates. I mean, I went to Walmart last night and eggs was like $10.
Yeah.
And granted, like I'm not like the best paid person, but even I'm thinking about like, okay, now I need to budget. I need to make sure that I am able to feed my family for the next month. So I think that for at least the population that we serve is definitely happening.
Yeah. So a lot of focus on that kind of housing piece, other economic considerations that are barriers that all intersect with that.
Yeah.
Current and historic policy.
And I appreciate them trying to do like Indigenous Peoples Day and stuff, but that doesn't get economic security to the people who are experiencing the effects of those really harmful policies.
I've come to the same conclusion that DJ expressed of I don't think there is like a ton of backwards facing federal oversight of ensuring that there's attention or any form of recompense if there's not a delivery on what's promised to Indigenous communities. So like structurally, less restrictive funding, but in terms of like the responsibility or like reporting back, I can't think of anything like that. And that's not to say it doesn't exist, but I'm having a hard time in my professional context identifying where it's at.
So I just love to do just kind of a quick recap of some things that I'm hearing and that I've heard, make sure I'm capturing it all, but also then maybe you all have some things that you'd like to add. So start off really kind of with a focus on maybe that national security piece and, who guards the guards, who's, our lands, our people, how these things are being stewarded. And it's a really great point. Started talking a little bit more about the flexibility of the funds and how can, when we know these all intersect, how can we actually afford that flexibility in the funding to address the issues at hand rather than just assume that it operates in a silo. But then in addition to that, the lack of accountability that comes with that, not just on individuals with the funds that are receiving the funds, but actually more backward facing around like who has the oversight to enforce that accountability around providing that flexibility to the government, other funders. We also talked a little bit more about the current and historical funding policies that have led to a legacy of issues around economic stability. So if that's housing, if that's other capacity building efforts, really kind of digging a little bit deeper into that housing issue. There are policies that make it difficult to build houses, to own homes, to spark growth in those areas because of the lack of collateral, the lack of infrastructure. And so that has become not only a barrier on reservations, but also here. It's a major issue in urban settings of housing instability and other economic policies writ large, and just kind of ending back with that kind of circling back to that accountability piece. But did I miss anything? I don't want to miscategorize or anything.
I think one more thing too that I think that we've experienced at Breakout is how many, mainly women, sometimes men come in for two parts. Sorry. One, if there's just a lack of training for foster families or native families. So, if we're trying to uphold IGWA, I think one of the barriers is that we still have children being placed in non-native homes. At times, like DHS will go straight to permanent placement with these non-native homes. And sometimes the tribes let it happen. Like you'll have them doing their due diligence as a part of IGWA, and Navajo Nation will say, we support that permanence plan. It's like, whoa, hold it. But I think there needs to be some awareness and training and recruitment of native foster families, because there are those who are open to adoption. But I think that's something that I think is a priority for DIFRAC, is training, foster family training. And then I think the other piece is we have Native women coming to utilize our services. We had a few Native men too who are fleeing from violent relationships or from violent situations. Something that was really surprising with Denver having a really large urban population, Native population, there's not a tribal coalition here addressing domestic violence and sexual assault. Granted, our services don't include DESA, so we have to do a lot of referrals to outside organizations where we had one mother with two of her children who came from Farmington, always grew up on the reservation. And it was kind of a culture shock. Her abusive partner brought her here, and thankfully, the courts intervened. He was sent back to Farmington, but she got left here, not knowing the city. So we had to, get her into housing, all of that. And then she was asking, is there like a Native women's group for DV survivors? I said, I don't think so. So we don't have like specific spaces where Native people who are experiencing violence, get any kind of recourse from the state or anywhere in the city. Aside from like Hisea, but they're in, Colorado Springs. And I think also the missing and murder crisis is a big deal here. I think they're doing their best to consolidate the data. But what are they actively doing? Like you see other states that have alert systems already. They have a process of how they're finding missing and murdered people. But you have people on the ground who are using networks and are on foot looking for these people who are not trained, search and rescue folks. They're just community members looking for people. And, they can't rely on the system when someone goes missing.
Yeah. Just for the official record, can you just tell us what DIFRAC is? I think we all probably know in the room, but just for like the note takers and the folks that might be listening in.
Yeah, it's the Denver Indian Family Resource Center. So we're a center that focuses on child welfare and supporting families that are either in the system or preventing them from entering the system.
And I was hoping to maybe just follow up if it's okay and just ask, so you're talking about some of these policies, lack of infrastructure, both for the domestic violence, but then also for the foster system. But for the committee who may not be as aware, but like what are the, like, please spell it out, like why is that important for environmental health and for like prosperity? If you don't have a good foster capacity now, like why does that translate into anything later? Like why isn't that just a problem for today and not for tomorrow?
Right. So if we're not upholding, I think the main pieces of ICWA, which I think, many advocates have fought for, if you don't have our children reunited back with their families, or creating those holistic pathways where they're reunited and they're placed out of care with a non-native family, what that causes is a cultural disconnect, a loss of language, a loss of cultural identity. And some of the services that we provide at Denver Indian Family Resource Center is those culturally connected services. So we do things like, in essence, trying to avoid the pan-Indianism, but things that folks are all familiar with, like most tribes bead. So we'll have beading workshops, or people make ribbon skirts or ribbon shirts. And this year we're going to do like a plant medicine workshop. So our youth get to go out there and pick their plant medicines from some of the gardens from our local elders that are growing them. They need that kind of connection so that they feel affirmed in who they are, to have that connection. Then that's really what makes them feel safe. And that's what's really healthy. Health is, of course, physical, mental, and emotional. But I think for Native people, it's also spiritual. You've got to have that spiritual and cultural connection so that you feel whole. I think in terms of violence is definitely a public health issue. I can't articulate exactly, but the only thing I can think of that would be a really important outcome is just having safe communities. I think in tribal communities specifically, they have a lot of that, the federal barriers, right? Really restricted funds on how to use it. But also, I think sometimes tribes that create their own programs may not have the capacity, or it's hard to recruit just because of the salary or something like that. I know like Navajo Nation had a family services program that was supposed to encompass all of that. And because of politics, you had the president at that time, Navajo Nation president, line item veto it. So you had a department, but there was no money. So you couldn't hire, you couldn't move it forward. Which kind of goes to what he said in the last group is also naming that us as Native people have to be accountable to each other. Sometimes these issues we have, I think, are also internal. And I think it's important that we name that too. Of course, we know all the outside factors as to why Native people are so affected by a lot of these issues. But I think it also needs to be a reconnection of like community solidarity is what I think really needs to happen. So I think that's kind of
Yeah.
what I'm thinking is healthy communities, right?
Yeah, no, this is really great. I appreciate that. I think we only have a couple minutes left, so I just wanna throw it out there. Are there any other thoughts as folks have been talking about? What are the other barriers that you see, hear about, thinking about that we haven't already covered for healthy communities?
Careerism.
Careerism.
Yeah, I mean, we got the best and the brightest of brown people sitting in this room, but you guys aren't actually meeting any res kids face to face right now.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we get nice and comfy up here in the ivory tower, got our little blazers on and, you know, we got the go home, watch Severance on the big screen TV. But really, our duty needs to be with the people who need to be picked up the most.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, you run that internal conflict of like, well, listen, you know, I went to school, I paid the price. Where are my just rewards? You know, I want that suburban, you know, I want my kids going to private school. You know, I'm supposed to go back and run the MHA. I'm supposed to be the tribal chairman, but I couldn't put my kids into the Mandaree school system, which is a -5 on greatschools.org. I mean, the average high school graduate reads the 5th grade level for Mandaree High School.
Yeah.
So, you know, we get comfy and we pat ourselves on the back. We're like, all right, you know, we're some real uppity smart Indians here in this room. But really, when it comes down to it, we are not in the trenches where we need to be.
I like that. The next generation view.
And I think that really has to go with, I think the community solidarity piece too, because I think something that I've observed in the Denver Native community is you have all these amazing like Native folks doing different things and they're kind of like in their own bubbles. But you know, if we had put a call out for folks to help us recruit for our parenting classes, right? They don't show up, right? They're not supporting. But if we had like a community feed, you know, my staff, myself, will drop what we're doing and we'll go over there and help. If it's the elders luncheon, we drop everything, go over there and help. I am not kidding you when I say I have like elders who call me and say, hey, I have a doctor's appointment. Do you think you can take me? I'm not running an organization, right? And I'm like, okay, Auntie, give me 15 minutes. And I will leave the office and go pick her up and take her wherever. Or she'll say, hey, there's an event. And I'll pick up 3 at a time and take them to the Denver Indian Center and say, you know, because that's what they want. That's like your community responsibility. And I think a lot of us are disconnected from that because, like DJ said, some folks become very comfortable with positions or comfortable with like a certain distance. And where I come from, there's always been a community solidarity. I didn't really say it out loud in the other group, but when I came from Albuquerque, like anything we did, all of the organizations would be like, all right, we're coming as a united front. But we heard so-and-so's someone who's not good. Let's have a sit down with him. And, you know, we would talk with him, call him in before we call anyone out, right?
Yeah.
And they would continue to cause harm in the community. And then we'd have to stand unified, like, this isn't right. You know, I don't know who raised you. I don't know what your community's from, but I know you come from a really great community.
Yeah.
There's also like, I think this just tendency of not being accountable to each other. And I think what creates a divide in, especially the movements in a lot of the Native community organizing is there's no forgiveness and no grace. How do we repair and restore these relationships that we have so that we can move forward together? Because we're all in this together, whether we like it or not, wherever we come from. And I think the accountability piece is how are we in relationship together? That's also important. But yeah, I'd have to agree with DJ. I think there needs to be a type of community solidarity where we do show up, where like, you know, my whole life I was my grandmother's tail. And I did a lot of listening more than anything. She'd tell me to do something, I would do it. And I think that's why like I'm so programmed to drop everything when an elder calls and says, I want to go to elder luncheon, can you take me there? yeah, let me try.
Yes.
It's like that kind of thing. I think that our communities really need to reconnect with. I think that's what really makes us unique. I think the community, for the most part, does a really great job at it. Like, I think Rick is really inspiring because he has those community feeds. He creates that space where everyone can come together and make those connections. And it's real flexible, right? It's not like, I'll be here at 10 o'clock. It's kind of mosey in and have, a good time. But yeah, I think I would really like to see that is more community solidarity.
Nice. And just again, for record, Rick is Rick Waters, who heads the Denver Indian Center and heads a lot of the events that Joanne was just mentioning. So, yeah, no, I think that these are all really great insights to some of the barriers to allowing our communities to kind of fully realize their own strengths. But is there anything else before we send you guys off to the next and final group before we give you some grub? This is good.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you all. All right. Yeah. Whenever you all are ready, I can show you to back down to the first floor.
Yeah.
A lot closer to the lunch.
Yeah. You'll be first in line.
I don't think I am not sure. Miles was in charge of that, and
Nice.
I'm sure he's done a great job.
Yeah, so far, I'm not.
Nice backpack. I lived in Sweden for 13 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they just left a moment ago.
Last group of people.
Oh, right, well, I don't want this one. So you can send her that. All right, thanks. All right, hey. How's it going? I've got too many notes here. Need to start a new page. All right, last session before we get some grub. So, let me get some notes up here. Is it Takabe's? Okay.
I saw it. Pull up, so.
Almost always is, right? That's our go-to. You guys work with Takabe a lot?
Every day.
Every day. I believe it. So, that's good. So, awesome. Well, we have our committee member joining virtually, I believe had to step away for just a moment, so this will be recorded for her to be able to watch later, so we'll just do a brief round of introductions, just so that way it's kind of on the record, so that way we know if some notes get messed up and we need to kind of circle back to the recording. So we'll just do that briefly. I'm Jared, know most of you already, but so I won't spend a long time on my introduction, but if you want to introduce yourself, Rick.
Rick Waters, I'm Iowa Cherokee, originally from Oklahoma, and right now Executive Director at the Denver Indian Center.
Right now, because he wears lots of hats and does many things all the time. So thanks for being here, Rick.
Rosalie Tallbow, from Northern Cheyenne from Montana, and I'm a member of the Denver Indian Center Board of Directors.
Perfect. Thanks for being here with us. And then last but not least, Jen.
Hi, I'm Jen Russell, Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. I'm a faculty member here at the Centers for American Indian and Alaska Native Health, and also the chair of the Board of Directors for Denver Indian Health and Family Services.
Lots of folks doing lots of things. I love it. It's good company to be around. So, Anthony, did you want to do a brief introduction as well?
I am Anthony DePinto. I work with the National Academies of Science, who's, along with Jared here, helping to organize this meeting today, and just really appreciative of all of you willing to come out here and express your perspectives and offer your knowledge. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, so we've got the next 20 minutes to chat. I'm actually not sure what sequence of questions you guys have already addressed, but we're going to talk through the central question for our discussion is, what are the barriers to strengthening your community's ability to respond to stressors? And just as a quick reminder, the National Academies are here today because as part of our charge to EPA is to really try to better understand and present a consensus study on the current state of cumulative impact assessments. And so I think oftentimes folks are thinking about like toxicology reports or air pollution reports or those kinds of stressors, if you will. But cumulative impacts are much more wide and encompassing of stressors that are not just kind of maybe soil contaminants or air pollution, but maybe also inclusive of socioeconomic stressors or a host of things, which is, I think, a more holistic view of kind of well-being, but also makes it really, really challenging for us as a committee to really try to figure out like what are the ones that we need to better understand and where our communities having issues responding. So it kind of runs the gamut, everything from water waste to, we've talked about foster care, everything and anything is kind of included in those stressors. So with that context, I'm going to kick it back to this group to really, maybe give us your perspectives on what are those barriers to strengthening your community's ability to respond to stressors.
I'll open it up and I'll keep it short. I'll try to keep it short.
Yeah.
First of all, I'll tell the other two groups, it's unfortunate that this event is taking place at this point in time in history, because our minds are kind of other places. So we're kind of funneled in on what are the stressors impacting our community. Right now, we can narrow it to one thing. But
yeah,
I will. Jen mentioned something at the last group was with respect to barriers in our community, and I'm referring to Denver and maybe even Colorado. Opinion, but I could probably back it up in some respects. Some people call it Indian politics. Some people call it difference of opinion with groups. And I think one of the barriers with our community here is sharing of information or communication, because you have so many layers of community here. And so accurate, credible information to everybody often gets distorted by different groups because of political opinion. Indian politics includes family politics as well. So you have those things, and I think so that flow of information. And for example, right now, what we're dealing with, there's a lot of misinformation out in the community, what's happening as we speak. And, you know, that incites fear. And it's fear of the unknown. And so what's one of the barriers? Well, can we be more collaborative as a community to make sure all our community members get informative and accurate information to deal with what we're dealing with? Because you're hearing it from everybody, from worrying about, you know, kids are going to get rounded up in a dragnet at school, or the parents are going to get rounded up going to someplace because of the ICE situation. And the other one is, well, am I going to have a job? You know, and just hearing it this board, you know, hearing examples of people say, the Denver Indian Center was closed. Why are you closed? I said, we didn't close, you know.
Yeah.
So we're trying to get that information out there. Even if all the federal funds are cut today, we will still be open, but we're adjusting and planning to that. You know, they're not going to take away our mission of what we do as a service to the community. We'll just have to look at other ways of doing it. Rosalie said it best, we're resilient. You know, Indian people are resilient. We'll find a way. It may not be in the shape right now because of this particular source of funding, but we're still going to, you know, the Indian Center is elders, youth, community. And same with DFIS and DIFRAC. I think they would go forward. Yeah. So anyway, I'm kind of from a holistic point of view, but yeah, there are barriers, and I think the primary one, and from my opinion, with what we're dealing with now, is fear. And what is fear caused by? Unknown, uncertainty. And so if we could get information out there assuring people, stay calm, you know, we're working to try to provide, you know, the workforce help, the health care help, social needs, child care, you know, all of the above.
Yeah, I think this is really great. I appreciate it. Any other perspectives on what are the barriers?
I just want to say, I think that we, as you want to call us urban Indians, face a lot different situations than, you know, in our last group, they were asking a lot about our nations. Like, I would never speak on behalf of my nation as a whole, you know, but I would say that we deal with barriers in an urban environment that might not be even the communication thing. I think that's probably more difficult to like reach, you know, a huge metro area. We're all spread out, you know, but we do have those, you know, those places where people gather, but it still makes it way more difficult, I think. You know, it might be different than a tribal community where folks are more centralized or I think, you know, even environmental factors for an urban environment, you know, we face a lot of different things like the air pollution, the water quality, things like that. But, you know, are certainly factors in tribal nations, but I think it looks different for us.
Yeah.
I think the community organizations in the Denver, especially in the Denver area, which we are members of, I think they coexist very peacefully, and I would I believe that they have a really good working relationship with each other now, but there's always going to be issues that come up like communication issues or how to get this information out or that information out. But I think they have a really good working coalition, and I think that's really important because even though we're members of the Denver community, we're almost all tribal members who grew up on Indian lands, reservations. And when you move into the city, you're pretty much on your own. You're finding your own job, you're finding your own house, you're finding things like that. And you didn't always know where to go. There was never, a lot of times there was no Indian centers, or they were just little skeleton, you know, maybe for a powwow, for what event, different events. they're not as, for a better word, as advanced as our community organizations are now, even though funding is always an issue of assisting our community members and things like that. But I think our local community organizations really do have a good working relationship. And I just like to thank Rich. I know he works hard at it, and as do with the other leaders and their employees. But I started to mention as we were breaking up my home tribe, Northern Cheyenne in Montana, and it was an environmental issue when a big power plant was built in Colstrip, Montana, within 15, 18 miles of our home reservation with no input from the tribe. And coal plants, coal production in our area, they've always been after the coal on our lands, and our tribal leaders luckily never agreed to any of that. And so when the power plants were built, they were huge, they were giants. And I remember my grandmother was probably in her 60s, 70s, and lived on a little ranch outside of town there. And when they started up the very first power plant, one day I went to visit her, but picked up my mother and went down to visit her. And she said, there's a big fire. And it was like wintertime. She said, there's a big fire right over our hill there. We didn't know that they started up the one power plant to test or whatever they were doing.
Yeah.
So we all go out and said, where, Grandma? She said, watch, it's right there. So we're standing out there and watching. Well, here's this big old plume of smoke come up. That's not a forest fire. What is it? I don't know, but you better go uptown and tell the police that there's a big fire right over the hill. So I said, okay. So we head back home after a while, and we stop at the police station, and they didn't know anything. So then we go over to the tribal office, and they said that the guy that was walking by, I was telling the tribal president that was going for lunch or something, I was telling him about Grandma's concern and everything. And he said, oh, they're testing the power plants there. And he said, oh my God, well, I got to go back down. What are they going to do? How do they burn? What are they, So he said, well, they took us down there yesterday and they told us what was going to happen. But before that, they would never have any communication with tribal members. But because of those power plants being built, our tribal president took it upon himself to tell our community members what was happening. And they filed a class 1, what was it called? Class 1 air quality, the first one that was ever filed in the United States of America on Indian reservations. And our tribal people were in Washington, D.C. probably once every week. And it passed over a couple of year and a half, 2 years. I don't know. It seemed like it took a long time. And now they had to put up sensors all around our reservation. And I used to tease my longtime tribal president that, did you go and thank Grandma Kinzel today? She's the one that got your air quality, class 1 air quality pass. And he said, bring her up. I'll take her to lunch. But native communities are never consulted. They never have any input. They never did, but meant now. But it's just that when you mention environmental, that's a major, and if the Northern Cheyenne tribe didn't take it upon themselves, didn't have a proactive tribal president who somehow or other found out that this was going to be taking place, and that it took many years for the plants were already built when they started the class 1 lawsuit. And so tribes have to take on a lot of that responsibility. They're not involved, they're not contacted. Maybe now it's a lot different. I'm an old timer and we have to do things on our own. So, but that's a perfect example. Community members did that.
Yeah, no, I think this is wonderful. I'm also just mindful of time. I never want to be accused of the guy that like makes people wait for lunch. That's not the title I ever want to earn. But also don't want to stymie the conversation. I'm just going to do a quick recap of some of the things I've heard. And we can kind of wrap it up with anything else that I've missed. But thinking about the barriers to strengths, we've heard about kind of the information spreading or the lack of maybe a centralized or an effective way to share information to everybody, especially given the urban context of how then do you get information out there effectively and efficiently and in a way that doesn't breed like fear because of that uncertainty. Also heard a little bit about kind of the politics involved, both at the federal, state, even regional, or within the town kind of aspect of it and how that can be a barrier. We talked a little bit about the urban setting difficulty. I think we've heard a lot about kind of the difficulties maybe on the reservation, but also the unique settings that make it urban specific and really trying to address those things. There's a lot of shared interest, and as you pointed out, a lot of folks doing really great work and trying to do this, but there isn't kind of a centralized effort or some way that folks can really come together. The information doesn't get there. But then we also switched gears and talked a little bit about like the lack of consultation, just writ large overall, both with tribes, urban settings, that there's just a lack of consultation. But then maybe because of that lack of consultation, there's also a lack of awareness from tribal citizens being able to respond to things proactively. If you just don't know, you just don't know. So those are some of the things that I was hearing and taking notes on, but is there anything that I missed or anything that someone would like to add?
You didn't miss anything, but I have to leave. I apologize, but I'm gonna come back this afternoon.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about your question in terms of barriers from this point and what we're dealing with now. So when you go back to the relocation time of 50s and 60s, one of the things are people, thousands of Indians coming in the face was racism.
Yeah.
Literally. And so now with what's happening today, legally, and these things that we don't know what's going to happen, is giving license to groups now to make America great again, make America racist again. I'm personal opinion, but I think that's something we've got to look at going forward around funding, around services, and everything else. And this is the unique part of Indian people, where we say we're not under DEI, but people don't understand that. They're still going to look at us because we're brown, like the immigrants, like the Hispanic relatives from the South come, live here. So I think that's a very, I know you have another concept of what lies ahead in the future, but I think that's something that's raising its head again here in this country. That we may be having to deal with. As a community.
Racism is getting a second breath of life, possibly.
And I'm only saying that because of words of advice from tribal leaders, although they're elected, their community from around the country, but also elected congressmen, a couple senators and representatives yesterday speaking. That's what they're saying. You've got to speak out. And we can't be nice anymore. We have to take a stand because, I think we're in a unique position.
For political.
Because not only is democracy at a high red alert now, tribal sovereignty at red alert. And that's for native tribes and people.
No, that's a really great point. I think a really strong one. Please.
Along the racism lines, I have a 16-year-old grandson that I raised from a baby, and he's a junior in high school. Yesterday, he came home very upset. There was a MAGA Republican substitute lady in his English class, and she was not ashamed to say a lot of things. He came in, he said, Grandma, I know I told you last week when one of the teachers said a lot of things. I asked you not to go to the school. They know me very well out of school. And so I honored that. And yesterday he said, you're going to need to go to school. So in the afternoon, I went and talked to the principal. That teacher was escorted out of the building. And last night we had, my grandson and I had a discussion. His father is a Pacific Islander, and where family name comes from is Asino.
Hmm.
Now he wants to go down to the court and change his name to our family name, Togo.
Wow.
That's the impact
Yeah,
of what's happening now.
well, thanks for your strength and for your willingness to advocate for your grandson and
Not only
others.
for my
Yeah,
grandson, for the children.
yeah.
And when I was talking to the principal, 4 other students came up and they all agreed with what I told the principal.
Wow.
And I stayed to watch. They had the a police officer come in and escort her out of the building.
Wow.
But that's terrifying.
Yeah.
That's terrifying.
No, people are feeling more empowered than they ever have
Yes.
before, you know, so.
Yeah.
So stay on the ground, keep fighting the fight. But you can't fight the fight without some food. So let's go get you some food. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.